A lot of us have been just gobsmacked by what's transpired over the past 2.5+ years in the state of Illinois, across the country, and around the world when it comes to the reactions to the COVID-19 pandemic. And I've at least done what I could to, chronicle all of what's happened, and being on the ground reporting from the Illinois State House at the beginning of the pandemic, and then watching all of the policies unfold from the governor's office, unilaterally making decisions for how the state should manage this situation with COVID. It's been incredible to watch, and some feel it's actually kind of dystopian in a way. But here we are now at the middle part of November of 2022. You got to remember all the way back to March of 2020. It's wild to think that we've come this far. But I remember being at multiple news conferences in February of 2020 and early March of 2020 where Governor J.B. Pritzker in Illinois and the then director of the Department of Public Health said there's no threat to the general public with COVID-19. They said that time and again at multiple news conferences. There's no threat to the general public from COVID-19. And then all of a sudden that flipped. And then it was, we've got to close the restaurants to in-person service. That caused all kinds of ripples throughout the economy. You then had the stay-at-home order, which closed a lot of businesses. Unemployment spiked incredibly. You had the in-person education being suspended, impacting kids' education, parents unable to get their kids properly educated, and the learning loss that's happened, let alone all of the deaths of despair that happened from increased overdose deaths, increased unreported abuse of children, a whole host of things. And it all really seemed to come from the top when it comes to the policies that Governor J.B. Pritzker implemented through executive fiat, meaning executive orders after declaring disasters for the entire state of Illinois when it comes to COVID-19. Now, I'm not the only one that's been kind of chronicling this in all the work that I've done over the past 2.5 years, but Wirepoints is also somebody who's been watching this closely, and Ted Dabrowski, the president of Wirepoints, he joins us now to talk about how Illinois continues these COVID-19 disaster declarations. But Ted, we're the only state in the region that has these things going on. We're an island yet again. Tell us about it. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks, Greg, for having me on. Yeah, these emergency orders ended in most of our neighboring states months ago, like 9 months ago for most of them, 2 years ago for Michigan, a year and a half for Wisconsin. So they've been finished with COVID and emergency orders and giving their governor executive powers to make unilateral decisions. They've been over with that for a long time. But here in Illinois, we're on our 981 straight days of giving our governor executive orders to unilaterally call for whatever he wants when he deems it necessary. And, I think most people understand giving a governor power if there's a tornado, a major flood, you got 30 days to help clean things up. But, 980 days, 35, 36 straight disaster proclamations for all 102 counties. It doesn't make sense, and it's very, very dangerous for our democracy.
Ted, we've seen all of the different policies, kind of laid them out, prohibiting indoor service for restaurants, and then, dialing it up with 20% or 50%, depending on the metrics that were used. There were a lot of questions about what metrics were used, all of this being done unilaterally by the governor's edict, without really much deliberation in the Illinois General Assembly, and by not much, I mean none. There was a little bit from the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules, but that came way late in the pandemic. But you also had policies like vaccine mandates that were implemented in Chicago. But the governor was encouraging other places to do vaccine mandates, and then you had the vaccine or the vaccine passports. Then you had the vaccine mandates kick in. and still an open question as to whether the governor is going to mandate COVID-19 vaccines for school kids to go to school. And I've got this story here. A lawsuit claims Massachusetts and Google installed COVID-19 spyware on 1 million devices. And Ted, I've traveled across the country recently, and I go into one state, and all of a sudden my phone tells me, hey, Nevada Public Health wants to make sure you know that you could possibly be close to somebody who's COVID positive. What about COVID-19 led to this acceptance, seemingly, of the American public to comply with this mass surveillance society that COVID seemed to usher in?
Well, I think the problem was, once they got started, once you started doing at the federal level these disaster declarations, states all did them. States got to extend them. The press didn't push back. The corporate elite, let's say the people with power, didn't push back, and suddenly it became accepted. And I think that's precisely the problem here in Illinois, and why Governor Pritzker still has that power tomorrow if he wants to demand vaccines or demand masks or anything like that, is because nobody's calling him out on it. The traditional media is not. You're one of the few stations that are actually talking about it, which I commend you for that. But it's just been an allowance, and I think it also is part of that woke culture that you can't speak up, and if you do, you're a bad person. So we've gotten stuck in that, and certain states have certainly pushed back against it, but there's a lot of them, like Illinois, that are still hanging on to those kind of powers, and that should scare any. I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. You should be scared about government powers that eventually allow what you just said with Google.
We're talking with Ted Dabrowski, president of Wirepoints, and their latest article on this, a 36th straight Illinois COVID emergency declaration that was issued on November 10th after the election, continuing yet another month of disaster proclamations for Illinois, 979 days plus under Pritzker's executive orders. And you ask the question, does it even matter? So I guess answer that question for us, Ted.
Yeah, I noticed it. If we're the only ones talking about it, it's only a couple of articles I've seen. Month after month this happens, and some months nobody writes about it, so it's accepted, so nobody cares. I just got to wonder whether that means Governor Pritzker knows that the legislature's not challenging him on it. I mean, there are some Republicans who've challenged him, but the Democrats in power have not tried to take his powers away. There's no discussion of it, so it just doesn't matter anymore. And I think it'll only matter when maybe somebody of a different persuasion takes office and tries to do the same thing, but are policies that people don't like, then they'll probably speak up. But it shouldn't be this way. There's the legislature, and we're talking about Harmon, we're talking about Welch. They should be stealing this power back from the governor and demanding that the governor, operate like a normal democracy, where you have checks and balances, and you have a legislature that's deciding things, and the governor has his veto power and things like that. But we're so far away from that today, and it can't become normal, and it's normalized is what it is. And then who knows what other crises it will be used to make people do things that people don't want to do.
Ted, I want to get your response to something a listener just posted on our live video here. It says, we get it. You don't care about people who died from COVID. What's your response to something like that? Is that kind of feeding into this, hit people over the head with this, what you said was woke culture, to make people fear of speaking out and questioning unilateral dictatorial control of state policies?
Right. I never said that. I care a lot about the people that die. What we're talking about is, here we are. We included a graphic of COVID deaths in our piece, and we haven't had a COVID. Of course, it's endemic now, but it's not pandemic. And there's a lot of cost to people's lives, and you mentioned that early on, what it did to kids. Locked out schools, the remote learning. We had lots of problems, and the lives and livelihoods that are impacted by COVID mandates are horrible too, and people forget that. So we try to make sure that people understand both sides, not just the COVID deaths, but which are horrible in and of themselves, but all the other lives that are impacted when we overreact. Or certainly 981 days into this thing, we're still giving somebody powers to do all kinds of things that should be coming out of the legislature.
Ted Dabrowski, Wirepoints president. Of course, people can find your work at the website wirepoints.org. That's
right, wirepoints.org, and also on Instagram and Facebook at Wirepoints. So, please. And we also, we aggregate every day news for people and put our commentary there. So sign up for our daily newsletter. Thanks for having us on this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I imagine we'll talk about this in the future because Pritzker said that he's going to mirror the federal COVID disaster policies. And the indication is there that that's going to stretch into early next year at the least on the federal level. And all of this also, Ted, just finally here, is this about, public safety, or is it about funds from the federal government, tax dollars from the federal government?
Yeah. I mean, certainly there's funds that still come in on some Medicaid funds and some food stamps. But, look at our neighboring states. If they're still getting money from the federal government, it's because they've legislated it, not because they do the unilateral dictates. And not only that, you have to remember, the more that we keep putting our hands out for federal money as a state, the more that we're complicit in the inflation that's going on, right? The federal government keeps spending money it shouldn't spend, and that's why we have this 40, 50-year high in inflation. We're helping, or we're contributing to that problem by keeping our hands out for more money. None of our neighboring states are doing that. So, why is it that none of them have emergency orders and disaster declarations, and we do? That's a big question.
Ted Dabrowski, wirepoints.org. Greatly appreciate your time. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you, Greg.
It is Springfield's Morning News on 92.7 WMAY. Springfield's News.